One American News Network.
All right, welcome back, everybody. That is Rutgers University students protesting the news that Condoleezza Rice was scheduled to be a speaker at their graduation ceremonies. Now, join me this time from Washington, D.C. is Karen Agnes. She's a senior fellow at the Independent Women's Forum, and she's founder of the Network for Enlightened Women. Karen, welcome back to the show.
Rick, it's great to be with you again.
All right, great to have you. You wrote in a recent article, which I think is very eye-opening, and I want to share with our viewers. Karen, you know, it's something that I believe all Americans should be aware of. I don't care if you call your... I'm going to try and not use the terms left or right. I'm going to try. I may not succeed. Left, right, liberal, conservative, Democrat, Republican. You recently debated a college professor who has a PhD in women's studies, and she began her presentation by stating that she was taught to reject the idea of debating people and instead to create uncomfortable conversations on feminism. And I think this is very important for all Americans to understand the tactics of what some people use to change how we look at things, rightly or wrongly. Tell us about that, please.
Yeah, one of the main problems on our college campuses today is the lack of intellectual diversity. And you mentioned, you know, the lead to one of my articles where I mentioned that I went down to debate a professor at Tulane, and she just rejected the entire debate construct. I mean, she's a professor. She should be an advocate for intellectual diversity and, you know, discussions and criticism and getting her students to think critically. And the problem is that then you see how this plays out when campuses invite speakers. And these students don't even want to engage with them or talk with them. They just try to protest to get them off their campus.
Intolerance in the name of tolerance. Do you agree, Karen?
Yeah, you mentioned the Condi Rice story, which is something that I'm really glad you're bringing to your viewers' attention. You know, she was our national security advisor, Secretary of State, and Rutgers invited her to be part of the commencement ceremony. And of course, the faculty council decided to try to stop it. And to the credit of the president of Rutgers University, he stood up strong and said that he was not going to rescind the invitation. But unfortunately, faculty continued to protest. You had students protesting. And this weekend, Condoleezza Rice decided that she didn't want to be a distraction, and so she's no longer going to be speaking during commencement. And I'd argue that this is really a disservice to the students at Rutgers. I mean, they're not going to get to hear from this woman anymore, and she'd be a great speaker.
And they called her a war criminal, these faculty members and these students who protested her scheduled appearance. When this professor at Tulane, who you were scheduled to debate, said she rejects the idea of a debate, instead wants to have uncomfortable conversations, what happened next? Was there an attempt at a debate, or did she just outright ignore the concept?
Well, I knew it was going to be a little tricky when, you know, often when students organize these debates on campus, they'll send me the tentative titles. And we went back and forth about 2 weeks trying to just negotiate the title for this debate. So I stood up there and gave my presentation trying to argue for limited government and personal responsibility and point out some of the flaws in big government policies. And she began by saying she rejected the debate construct, but then at least she did engage on some of the issues and you know, made some points. So I'm glad she at least showed up because it got some students there. But the big problem is that this is the way she was taught. I mean, she was a PhD in women's studies.
Wow.
And she said she was taught to reject this debate construct. And that's a problem if that's being taught throughout our women's studies departments in this country.
You know, it's a problem. You're right, Karen. She's a PhD in women's studies. What more can you say? And the troubling part is, and you're alluding to it, she's teaching and probably molding and influencing young minds, age 18 to 22, you know, roughly speaking.
The next generation.
Yeah. You have said that people like this professor have incorrectly defined the definition of the empowerment of women today. How so?
Well, in the same event, one of the students there raised their hand and tried to push back on an argument that I was making, that the Life of Julia, that infographic that was put out by the Obama campaign in the last presidential election, showing that, you know, at every major stage in a woman's life, she's dependent on the federal government, whether it's for school, for student loans, to start a business, even to have a baby. There's some interaction with the federal government. And I was arguing against that. And this student pushed back and said she wants to have big government there. She wants to depend on the federal government. And to me, that's another big problem where, especially on the women's issues, and especially when we talk about feminism and the women's movement today, when we're when the left is creating this culture of dependency among women and this idea that women are dependent on the federal government. And I think we've got to push back strong on that, because that is not true empowerment.
It is not. I'll go a step further. It's not even an empowerment, period, let alone true empowerment. Karen, if the RNC called you into their offices today and said, we want your advice, we want to pay you as a high-paid consultant to advise us on how to reach out to women in America to let them know that we are here to help them empower themselves, and that we don't have a war on women, as we're accused of and we're always trying to defend ourselves against, what would be your advice? What's the solution to all this?
First, we've got to get in the game. I go out and speak on a number of college campuses, and you'd be amazed at how many of these students say they've not even heard those arguments before. And it's because you have women's studies departments, you have women's centers, you have women's organizations, all pushing those women to the left. There's no wonder that the right has a problem winning single women. In this last election, you saw 40% of women voters were single women, and the president won single women by 36 points. So I'd say first, we've got to go out and engage where those women are. And secondly, we've got to paint a positive picture about what we're doing for women on the right and what kind of society we want and how that's actually better for women. And I think one way we can really focus on that is that we want a robust economy so that these students, when they graduate, can get the jobs that they want and then can move up the economic ladder to success. And right now, you have policies in place that are making it more difficult for all Americans, including women, to succeed.
All right. Karen Agnes, Senior Fellow at the Independent Women's Forum. Listen, you're very articulate, very passionate, and very informative about what you had to say. And I really appreciate you coming on here and saying words that I think a lot of our viewers empathize with and are probably saying to themselves, thank God there's someone on television saying these things that make sense. Thanks for joining us.
It's great to join you again, Rick.
All right. John McCain says you should be fined